Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/milkshakesocks8823. I believe I had a close encounter with something strange in Mendocino National Forest. This has left me feeling extremely shook, and I'd love some opinions, especially from someone with experience. Last year I had a very strange experience in a national forest out in California. I was by myself, on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into Mendocino National Forest. I like to camp in national parks/forests cause it's isolated so my dog can roam and they're free of charge. A trade-off for sketchy/rough drives into the parks sometimes and lack of service/assistance. Anyway, I was driving up this dirt road kind of curling up a mountain around maybe 5 p.m. It was very nice out, sunny and warm with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area, and that feeling did not let up. Driving up the mountain I felt like I shouldn't stay there, and I even texted my boyfriend about it for as long as I could before my phone completely lost service. I was looking for a sign of another person having been around the area lately, but didn't see anything. I pulled over and got out of my car with my dog to look over the edge and noticed a dead squirrel and some broken glass mixed in with the dirt and gravel road. Yuka, my dog, starts to growl slightly. She is vocal, but I've almost only ever seen or heard her growl at or with other dogs. I did see her growl at a possum once, so it could be something she smelled maybe. This place continued to make me feel quite on edge, but I pride myself in being an independent traveler and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a bit further with my grumbling pup to see if I could find a good place to camp. I continue to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind no one is going to be going more than 5 to 10 miles per hour up this thing, and that's if there's anyone even there. I hear men's voices. They sound close and I think I should call out to them, so I stop my car but then kind of freeze up and feel like I shouldn't. I can't really make out what they're saying. I don't see any sign of people anywhere, and I get back in my car and continue to slowly drive forward and cautiously look for where the voices could be coming from. I've never ran into other people in a national park or forest when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling grows about the voices, which have sort of come and gone a few times, and I give up and begin to turn my car around. I honestly don't remember how Yuka was acting on the way down. I was scared and focused on getting out of there. I just distinctly remember being surprised at her grumbling when we were standing outside of my car. Kind of dangerously quickly I went back down the mountain, not seeing any sign of anyone. I decided to spring for luxury and get a hotel for the night. I figured I was just fine. Huge and open spaces can be intimidating, I told myself, and the voices could have been echoing from somewhere far off and they just sounded close. Animals die, glass gets broken, nothing happened, cool. But I remember this place, it sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies, if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to the feeling I had driving up that mountain, and it's honestly kind of interesting to me as well as frightening. I recently happened across some information as well as some Native American lore that made me feel extremely uneasy. Fast forward a year, I've mentioned this place to a few people and the haunting vibes it gave me, but nothing much more. Googled the national park once and didn't see anything, but didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things of that nature, hence my fascination in this little event lol. So my boyfriend and I were coming up on finishing our road trip just yesterday. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 2 to 3 hours left and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts and YouTube videos. We went from the No Sleep podcast to the X-Files and ended up on a True Stories video dealing with Native American lore. I'm half paying attention, petting my dog, playing Pokemon on an emulator. And I hear the narrator mention Wendigos. Very briefly says what they are and casually mentions they can mimic voices. I mean it when I say the most horrible chills I have ever had in my life crawl down my spine, and I stare at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that national forest I was freaked out about last year. He says he does, and he reminds me that he texted me I was probably close to a Wendigo. He did. I remember him saying that, but didn't know much about their lore and thought he was just being funny, like, yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you, or some other dad joke. And he was like, no, I mean I was mostly joking, but I said it specifically because you said you were hearing voices that you couldn't find a trace of. I feel strange AF and I start googling Wendigos, etc., etc. They are allegedly able to mimic human voices and they would live in that sort of area. It all matched up. Obviously there's a ton of questionable info out there, but I tried to find more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I then specifically looked up missing persons in the area, and the first headline that catches my eye is, "Another family goes missing in Mendocino," and I went through different websites and news articles of people going missing, but they are all a little hidden underneath national park websites and pictures of trees. I remembered looking up the forest about a year ago and didn't see anything, and realized these stories didn't seem to be talked about much, which also piqued my intuition. It was stated that well over 100 people in the past 8 years have gone missing and not been found, on top of many which are found dead. It just has my intuition super spiked. Remembering how unsafe I felt and how much I wanted to get out of there terrifies me, and I felt so uneasy about what I was hearing, and do to this day. My dog and I are very close. She was a stray that started following me one day and I ended up bringing home from Costa Rica, so her little growls along the way makes me feel like there was something wrong. Even though it was just a storytelling video, those stories originate from somewhere. I have done a lot of solo traveling both in and out of the country, and I have never had such a bad feeling, on top of seeing an unnecessary amount of dead animals in a national forest, which just seems strange. I don't think I'll be doing more solo traveling unless it's around civilization, lol. Does anyone know about authentic Native American lore, or has anyone else had a kind of inexplicable experience like this? Extra points if you've had bad vibes in Mendocino National Forest from a Wendigo. Second story. This story was shared by Scribbled Corvid. My farm is haunted. I've spent almost my entire life on the family farm. We've always been the first to adopt modern equipment and farming techniques, and I was the first in the family to attend college. Needless to say, I studied agricultural science. My skills save us a lot by not having to hire outside experience. Things have always been kind of weird in the region. Some say our wheat fields were plowed in over an ancient burial ground, and others say that a witch cursed the local region before being drowned in the local lake that we get our irrigation water from. What I do know is that things seem to be growing weirder ever since my grandfather was forced to retire and move to town. I would like to visit him more, but there's always something new to do. Things break down, and livestock get spooked. Things do seem to be easier when I bring Betsy with me. Betsy is grandfather's favorite shotgun, which he passed down to me before having to move into the home. My parents are out of the picture for the next year. They're taking an around-the-world cruise for their 30th anniversary. It's not easy to contact them. International phone calls are expensive, and they are limited in time when out at sea. Some of the workers are spooked too and refuse to spend the night on the property despite having access to spare houses for far cheaper rent than they pay in town. Not that I blame them. I spent the night in one of the houses since it was close to where I had to work late and get up early for a job, working on a broken irrigation pump. That night I slept poorly as I heard all kinds of strange sounds. Most would say it's probably an animal, and I would say the same if I did not hear it myself. I know what the local wildlife sounds like, and this was not that. It sounded like the Nazgul scream out of the Lord of the Rings movies. We're a high-tech farm and I've got plenty of cameras for monitoring. I went through the footage and got nothing but weird shadows and glitches on half the cameras. The other half were battery operated and were dead. Not usual, but also not unusual considering the quality of lithium batteries out of China these days. After I fixed the pump, I went out with Betsy and swapped in fresh batteries from a good brand and made a note to throw the bad ones in the battery recycling bin the next time I was in town. Things seemed to change for a while. The strange sound stopped, and all the cameras were working normally with no glitches or other failures. The good times didn't last. Things started to quickly get weird again a few days later. I'm hearing strange sounds. The workers are also hearing strange sounds while working in some of the more distant fields. The livestock are all spooked. Sometimes the workers report seeing shadows out of the corners of their eyes and are easily spooked. I've seen the same shadows. They resemble some kind of creature that doesn't belong in nature. Some of the families who decided that farming was not for them but still like the great outdoors have become park rangers and timber workers. Some of the stories they have shared at gatherings remind me of what I'm dealing with now. Their stories about strange creatures of the night, mysterious staircases, and the like sounded far-fetched at the time, but maybe I should contact some of them for a bit of help. If it's something spooky, they might have the experience, and if it's more mundane, then we have a chance to hang out and shoot some beers and maybe some targets. Honestly, looking back, I think this all started when we bought out the cane farm. They had been doing bad for years. We never really hung out with their kids. They were weird and not in a fun way. A school rumor went around saying that one of their kids drowned another. Other rumors say that one of the kids tried to burn down the bar. All I know is that they were in and out of school. Grandfather did something with some of his older friends, something he never told me about, only that the matter was settled any time that I asked. I fear that with him off the property ever happened has come undone, but Betsy's presence offers reassurance and hope. I read some online forums and discovered that sometimes supernatural entities like spirits can change the temperature of an area or even show up on infrared cameras, so I ordered a bunch of smart farming sensors to monitor the ambient temperature, pressure and humidity levels and the temperature and moisture content of the fields. I even installed some thermal surveillance cameras in places where workers reported seeing the strange shadows the most. These cameras also work in the dark to show if people are trespassing. The data from the sensors made no sense. Weird temperature drops that seemed random until I plotted the data on a map of the farm. I could see that things were moving around at night, and even during the day, causing local temperature drops. I filled in gaps with more sensors to better track the mystery and repointed some cameras. These cameras showed mysterious shadows and glitches at the same time the sensors reported drops in temperatures. Some even caught videos of strange floating orbs. Of course, I'm freaked out now. Something strange is going on, and if the data is correct, it's starting at the old cane farm and slowly spreading into the rest of the property. I've read that inviting the supernatural into your home is granting permission for them to have a wild party. Did we inadvertently do that by integrating the cane property into our own? Is what caused their madness now infecting me? I tried to call my grandfather, but he said that he couldn't talk over the phone about that. He'd talk to me in person but did not want to risk sounding crazy enough to end up in the dementia ward. I fully understand his concern. I'm worried about ending up in the psych ward if I talk about this to the wrong person. Things started getting more intense as the staff reported that they felt like they were being watched, and not by the cameras that they used as much as I did for their work. They even noticed the shadows and glitches. It all came to a head when one of the staff working alone on the old cane block was attacked. They managed to radio in for help and we called an ambulance while rushing over all armed. The beast had him trapped up a tree. It's like something I've never seen before. It was some strange furless beast covered in scales like a blend of a dog and a giant lizard. Saul swore it was a chupacabra. We all fired at it and our shots did nothing. We were panicking as it started to approach us. I remembered that Betsy warded off the entities before, ran to my truck, and grabbed Betsy, which was loaded with slugs. The first shot missed the creature, but the second shot hit true and did massive damage. The third shot finished off the wounded creature. Strangely, the beast didn't die like a normal coyote or wolf. It seemed to dissolve into oily shadows that faded from existence. We were all shocked to see that it faded from existence. Jack, one of my longtime friends turned employee, suggested that we go into town and get the pastor to come out and bless the place. Saul suggested that we call his church and ask for the priest to come out and perform an exorcism. When the emergency services arrived, the injured employee was loaded up on an ambulance and taken back to town. We told the police that it was a coyote that ran back into the forest, frightened by the rest of us arriving. If we told the truth, we'd be laughed at or worse, locked up for discharging firearms while drunk. That night we went to my grandparents' old house. One of the few places that the entities seemed to avoid. Our map data of their movements told us this. They also said that multiple entities had converged on the main road out of the property. We all felt better even as we lit the old fireplace and got to chatting. After a while, our conversations turned to talking about what we encountered and what could be stalking the farm. We discussed if it could be demons or devils, the jinn, yokai, or even Wendigo. The next day things calmed down. None of our sensors or cameras reported any anomalies. All the crew went back to town that night, leaving only myself on the farm. It was another quiet night. Seems like that activity drained the energy of whatever was haunting the farm. The one strange thing was a storm warning for the area that night despite no long-term storm predictions. I wasn't too worried. Every farmer knows that the weatherman can get it wrong. Despite the weirdness seeming to be reduced, I did notice things to be very quiet. Most of the bird life seems to have vanished, leaving behind a few flocks of corvids, and even the flocks of crows and ravens are huddled tightly, wary about something. I was worried that it could be something to do with the supernatural, but more likely they're making their own preparations for the storm. I called one of my brothers who is a park ranger at one of those national parks known as a hotspot for missing persons and rumored to be haunted by some of the entities I discussed with the workers. I shared my findings and even some of the discussions with my workers with him. Luckily, one of the workers got a picture of the beast. As I talked to my brother, the predicted storm rolled in, flashes of lightning illuminating the windows. I spot the weird shadows again in the lightning flashes, but figure that it's just the flash overwhelming my eyes since everything was so calm. He grew more alarmed the more I told him on receiving a copy of the photo that he'd take a few days of emergency leave from work and be bringing a coworker with him. He sent me a phone number for a government department that I had never heard of before. The Bureau of the Occult. After I hang up on my brother, I check on the cameras and sensors. Some of them are down, likely due to lightning strikes and trees falling on cables. I'm not too worried. Cameras and sensors can be replaced in the morning. I do notice that the cloud backup hasn't run since I started installing the extra sensors and sigh in frustration. I plug in a portable disk and start the backup process before calling the bureau on the number that was given to me. I'm greeted by a professional voice, and after I explain my situation, I'm told that my brother opened the case on my behalf. The bureau did request that I send them all my data, and I agreed to email it to them. I wrote up an email on my laptop with the details of when I first started to notice the weirdness. The contact details of my grandfather, who knows more details including remote access credentials and the different accounts for the different software I use on my farm server that runs all the data gathering and analytics. I don't store it all on my laptop, I've got a dedicated server for that. Moments after I sent the email, I was both blinded and deafened by a nearby lightning strike that hit the power pole for the house. The force of the lightning strike makes the pole transformer explode in a shower of sparks. I grab Betsy and run over to the server that runs my monitoring infrastructure only to find flames coming out of the power supply. I pull the hot swap solid-state drives only to find the chips physically blown. I groan in frustration. This bureau, if they are real, will think it's a hoax. The portable backup drive seems to be intact and cool to the touch, so I grab that hoping that an archive of the data is on there, then grab Betsy. With the power out to the house, it's not safe to stay. I don't trust shadows or darkness, and I doubt I'd have enough batteries for my flashlight collection to last the night. I spot the lights on in my grandparents' house and then remember that Saul was going to spend the night on the property so he could get an early start. I quickly called him to let him know that the power was out in my house after the transformer took a lightning strike, and he agreed to use a spotlight light the way for me. I load the drive and my laptop into a bag with some boxes of shotgun shells. I wear a flashlight on my head, attach another to Betsy, and make my way out into the darkness outside. It's cold and rainy outside. The ground is muddy. I make my way to my grandparents' house and find that shadows are swirling around in the wind. Sometimes the shadows group up around something like a tree or fence only for it to fall over or get struck by lightning. The shadows make their way towards me, and I find myself wielding Betsy to drive them off. Just pointing light at them seems to deter them. Saul spots the same and uses his spotlight to help drive the shadows away from me. He's well lit by my grandparents' house. It's got a generator with plenty of fuel, so it's a perfect safe haven. I run over to the house as fast as I can but slip in the mud. I look up and spot what seems to be some kind of enormous bird lit up by a bright flash of lightning. I scramble the rest of the way to my grandparents' house and hear a clap of thunder that sounds almost like a cry of frustration. Once in the light, I immediately feel safe. Saul grabs my hand and leads me inside. Once inside, he tells me that he spotted the same strange bird in the storm. If whatever is haunting the farm is strong enough to summon that, I have no idea what to do. Maybe my brother and this mysterious bureau of the occult can help. All I know is that help will arrive in the morning and that I need to hold out until then. I've got Saul as backup, my grandparents' home as a safe spot, and a gun safe that might hold more special guns like Betsy's. The data could be wiped, or I might have a copy of enough. All I know is that tomorrow will be a better day, and until then Saul and I will take turns sharing guard duty and sleep. Third story. This story was shared by you/not_necessarily. There is something in the woods next to my remote town. I live in a rural town, far away from the bustling urban cities that many people live in. It's like those stereotypical small neighborhoods, where everyone knows each other. I like living here, in the fresh unpolluted air with kind and friendly neighbors all around me. However, our town has a dark secret that no one speaks about. It's the woods right next to the town. Everyone in the town had gone to the woods at least once. We usually had some people go hunting there during the hunting season, and also had plenty of people go for walks there. However, growing up, we have always heard terrible rumors about the forest. Amongst all the stories about mythical creatures and weird caves, one story in particular has stuck with me. The story goes like this. Around 30 years ago, back when most of our parents were also teenagers, one group of 4 teenagers decided to go camping in the summer holidays. Their parents supported it, and so they set off after a couple days of preparation. On the first day, they quickly set up their tents, then went ahead and started to do a bit of exploration before settling down and setting up a campfire for the night. Towards the late evening, one of the teens, David, the only survivor, felt like something was wrong. He had that deep gut feeling, the one that grips your heart with an icy grip. He didn't know how to vocalize this to his friends, but he did tell them he felt something was wrong. Imagine sitting with your friends in an open forest with tall dark trees, a rather small campfire being the only source of light. You could say David was just scared, but he swore he could see a blur of movement in the thick darkness of the trees every now and then. He felt completely exposed out in the middle of nowhere, with the wind whistling against the trees. And then it happened, his friend Richard also noticed the movement in the trees. It was subtle before, but now it constantly appeared all around them. It was the blur of a dark humanoid figure that kept disappearing and then reappearing in some other spot again. It happened to always be out of the perimeter of the light of the campfire, so none of its details could ever be made out. By now the teenagers were spooked and everyone had realized that there was definitely something out there. It was also hard to convince each other that the movement was nothing more than a wild animal when the figure was, quite obviously, humanoid in shape. The group had two choices. To run back home quickly through the dark forest and be careful not to lose their way or trip and hurt themselves out in the middle of nowhere. Or, to stay put at the campsite and wait until the morning to return home. That same figure began to move more frantically through the shadowy silhouettes of the trees, seeming like it was circling them like a predator hunting its prey. David decided to make a run home through the woods as the others yelled out after him. He would later say it was a gut instinct that told him to run as far away as he could from that thing. To continue running until his legs burned and his lungs felt like they were being pulled apart. As soon as David ran halfway to the line of trees, the creature suddenly stopped moving, causing David to freeze. A menacing silence descended upon the forest. The group, with the exception of David, were still huddled around the campfire, shivering not from the cold, but from fear. The leaves began to rustle from beyond the tree line, and slowly but surely the figure that had been circling and watching them for some time now appeared out of the tree line. As its features began to be illuminated by the light from the campfire, the group's screams filled the silence. As David would later describe it, the creature had a humanoid body and was wearing long track pants and a hoodie. However, it had something very, very wrong about it. Its face was upside down. The large circular bloodshot eyes were in place of the mouth, while the nose was twisted and pointing upwards. The mouth of the creature was contorted into an upside-down grin which almost looked like a cartoonish frown. The teeth were razor-sharp and yellow with stains of red. Its skin was pale and thin with blue veins visible all over the face. Its fingernails ended in long sharp points like daggers. As the group stared at the creature in frozen fear, it lunged in a fraction of a second towards the three teenagers still next to the campfire. It used its nails to rip everyone apart in a few agonizing moments like a paper shredder to a piece of paper. It then hungrily fed on the flesh of the dying teenagers. David broke out of his trance as soon as the creature locked its misplaced eyes directly with him. He turned around and began to run into the woods. The creature moved at an incredibly fast pace as it caught up to him in a matter of seconds. It grabbed David's arm and dug its nails deep into his shoulder until David's shrill screams could be heard from the town. It all happened in slow motion. David continued to pull away from the creature in a desperate attempt to run and get away from it, but the creature had a very solid grip of his entire arm. The creature had made one mistake though, which let David survive. It had dug its nails so far into David's arm that after a few long moments of David desperately pulling away, his entire arm ripped away from his body. David would later continue running until he collapsed from blood loss. An early morning runner would find him by the side of the running trail and he would make a miraculous recovery in a city hospital. The campsite would be found later by rescue crew, covered in blood and gore with the barely recognizable bodies of the three boys arranged in a triangle around the long dead campfire. David is still alive today and he's told this story to every kid in town. You can see him stare out into the woods with his only hand leaning on the wooden fence of his balcony watching the tree line with blank empty eyes. People in our town would only go to the woods during the morning and be sure to come back before sunset. It's not that anyone fully believed David's story. Some thought he had developed false memories from the traumatic event, while some say he could have dreamed it up in his medically induced coma. But no one can deny the fact that that night, something did happen in the woods. People may have tried to comfort themselves by not believing his story, but no one dared camping in the woods again. This brings me back to my story. Yesterday, I missed my typical morning run because of a work obligation, and so I decided to still exercise in the evening. The sun had mostly dipped under the horizon and the sky had started to darken from the orange and purple color to a rather dark blue. The trees stood tall on either side of the trail where only darkness existed beyond the tree line. I was running pretty fast and nearly back out of the woods and at home when the sound of the birds completely stopped. A deafening silence permeated the air like the calm before a storm. I began to run even more frantically as bad thoughts began to appear in my mind. Just as I was at the end of the trail and out of the woods, I saw a blur of a figure right beside me, staring at me from the tree line. I could swear that just as I made it out of the woods it disappeared back into the tree line with a frown on its face. Except there was something wrong with the face. It was upside down. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Keeper of Nightfall. My local Wendigo. Well, after all my years of supernatural encounters, I am finally making a Reddit account to post my stories. This is my most recent Wendigo encounter in DeWitt County, Texas. January 12, 2019 around 8 p.m. Now I'm gonna be honest. I chose to go out on this particular night because my town was having a little ghost tour at the haunted hospital. I was lonely and wanted to at least see others having fun. It was 8 p.m. when I left the house and planned to be back within an hour. I have a routine of circling my town in the evening because I just like patrolling and there's always things creeping about after nightfall. I made my way to the haunted hospital and once I got there I saw flashlights inside the windows and heard laughter. That's nice, I thought. Seeing others have fun made me smile and got rid of some of the loneliness I was feeling. This was the halfway point of my walk and I started my second half heading home now. There were some woods on the opposite side of town now, but nothing impressive until I got to the last quarter of my walk. Now I was passing the baseball field on my left with a large wheat field on my right. This wheat field used to be a large extension of the woods but was cleared out for growing wheat. I continued again and crossed the small bridge that went over a creek and past another section of woods. I was now headed towards an old metal building that has recently been turned into a place for making gates and fences. It was about 9 p.m. now. This building had two small white houses beside it and a stretch of dirt road wrapping around the backside of it before returning to normal asphalt road. Now at night this place seems pretty scary, but this was one of my favorite places to hang out at night and is a normal path I take my walks through. As I was coming up to the dirt road I saw a very tall 8 to 10 foot pale figure, with lanky arms almost dragging the ground, about 40 feet ahead of me briskly walk from the white houses to the woods. I stopped walking. What was that, I thought. Its size confused me so much that I had forgotten my previous encounters with a smaller version of it. After a few minutes of standing there I convinced myself to continue walking forward. I mean, I was an adventurous person and there's no way I was just going to turn tail and go home when I just saw something so odd and out of place. Not even 15 seconds into walking forward this sudden heavy sense of dread overcame me like a giant weight crashing down on my shoulders. My instincts were telling me something was really wrong. I turned my iPhone light on and shined it at the woods. Nothing. I kept walking while keeping my head on a swivel, looking in all directions to keep my surroundings in check. About the 5th or 6th time I looked at the woods I saw it. A huge bleached white humanoid figure crouched on all fours. It was easily still 5 to 6 feet tall even though it was bent over. Its black eyes paralyzed me. It had a big round bald head and an extremely emaciated body, void of all hair, with very long, almost dislocated-looking arms and legs. Its legs were like a flamingo bird's at the knee as it bent backwards instead of forward. I took all this in a matter of seconds. Suddenly it reminded me of a praying mantis when it swayed back and forth while staring as if deciding whether to attack or not. This broke me out of my trance and I ran as fast as I could. I didn't look back until I had ran a block. Out of breath and scared as heck, I finally took a glance back. I didn't see anything in sight. I didn't hear it chase me either. Maybe it was just stalking those people in those two little white houses and was waiting for me to go away to go back to its business. Maybe it didn't want anything to do with me. But that wasn't the end. I got home, took a shower, and turned out the lights before I hopped in bed when suddenly there was something tapping on my window. Tap tap tap. 3 taps and nothing else. I laid in my bed that night wondering whether it had followed me home or not. A string of bad luck ensued afterwards the following weeks. I was constantly burning stuff on the stove that was relatively easy to make, and I was an excellent cook on top of that. My dog started going nuts at night, growling and barking at night in the living room and at the front door, which she has never ever done, as she is the quietest, sweetest dog you'll ever meet. And finally I got deathly sick for 3 weeks straight with no sure sign of what I had gotten. 103 fever, vomiting with blood, diarrhea with blood, sneezing, coughing, sore throat, migraines, nerve spasms, stuffy and dry nose. It changed constantly, severe stomachaches, aching all over, really especially in my bones, other lesser entities taking advantage of my state trying to latch on to me, and slight insomnia. I've had smaller strings of bad luck before, after hearing its mimicry trying to lure me into the forest, or seeing it one other time, but I didn't see any details, but nothing ever this extreme. I don't go into the woods alone anymore. Sorry it's been so long, guys. After talking to people who know about and study this type of thing, we've come to the solution: it may have been a forest giant. A subcategory of fairy or fae. They have many names and they are not what you expect. I also came to the conclusion there may have been a small one living my house for years. It has been gone for a good while now though. 5th story. This story was shared by you/gothghost0513. Wendigo or something similar. Please help. So within the past few years I have been able to kind of see spirits. When I say kind of, I mean that I cannot see them with my eyes, but I can feel where they are and I can get mental images of what they look like. I have several friends that can also see spirits, so needless to say, I have a lot of ghost experiences. I typically do not get very scared by my encounters as I have gotten used to them, and I have been realizing that I have been able to see them for as long as I can remember. That being said, a few years ago me and a couple friends had an encounter with something I have never thought I would encounter. We have been trying to figure out what it is, as a different friend of mine and I have been having experiences recently that could lead us to believe that my theory of it being a Wendigo or skinwalker could be correct. I would love some help in figuring out what this thing is. It looks like a Wendigo but has some tendencies that aren't similar to behavior that would be expected of one. A few years ago when this all began, I was staying at my friend's house and one of her other friends was there too. This entire night was crazy because all 3 of us can see spirits and we all have things that are attached to us. That being said, this entity is not attached to us, but we think it is attached to my friend's mom. But we had been experiencing things all night, but it was just our spirits showing off. Until later in the night, we were sitting in her living room and her parents' room was right off of the living room. The door was cracked and I was the first one to notice it. I sat there and stared for a minute because I was trying to figure out what it was. The next thing I know, they notice it too. It was so tall that it was staring at us over the top of the door and was hunched over. It had its hands over the top of the door and they were long and bony. The thing that was really disturbing though was the fact that it had a deer skull for a head and it had red eyes. Seeing it was enough to make me uneasy, but at one point during the night it rushed at us and I felt it touch me. Fast forward to a couple months ago, me and my other friend began having some experiences after we had begun to put some of the pieces together. It started with me getting no caller ID phone calls, which then turned into my friend getting them, which escalated into her friends getting them because of how often they were around us. In the midst of this, my friend had a very scary experience. She was at her apartment alone when she heard a knock at the door. Not wanting to open the door immediately, she looked through the window to see a man she had never seen in her life standing far enough away from the door that she could completely see him, and as soon as she looked out that window she made eye contact with him. She has told me that she just had a horrible feeling when she saw him and that he seemed really weird and off and that his eyes looked lifeless. A few days later I am sitting in my car outside of her place waiting for her to get home. I had my window cracked and I didn't have any music playing, and out of nowhere I heard a man say, "Hey," to me, clearly trying to get my attention. The weird thing about this though is that it came from a very small wooded area next to her place. I heard it and it sent chills down my spine. I currently live 2 hours away from where the original experience happened. My friend's apartment has a little wooded area outside of it, but when I say little, I'm talking walk from one side to the other in less than 5 minutes. Like I said, it does have some tendencies of a Wendigo or skinwalker, but the thing that doesn't add up is the fact that we don't live close enough to a wooded area that I would think it would be a problem, and I don't know why it would be harassing my friend that wasn't there for the original experience more than it did me. I have spent plenty of time in wooded areas both during the day and at night, so it would have had several chances to try to lure me in, but it hasn't. If anyone could offer me some answers or advice, I would be very grateful. Sixth story. This story was shared by you/Beatty_559. I found a map in the woods and wish I left it there. I always enjoyed going out into the woods. That is why, when I moved out of my parents' house, I looked specifically for a place that had some woods behind it, so that when I wanted to go, I didn't need to drive for great distances for a short hiking trip. Besides all of the beauty of the nature in the woods across the street from me, there was another reason why I wanted to live near a forest: bones. I had a hobby that people may consider morbid, but I liked going into the woods to find animal bones, even better if they were skulls. I was just fascinated, and at that time, I would spend hours just searching for bones. It was just a collecting hobby. One day was like any other day. It was the last day of college, and because I was fairly introverted, I had no one to celebrate with. That didn't really bother me. Not many people liked spending their last college day in the woods. I got home around noon and called my parents. They congratulated me. We were planning to celebrate the end of the school year by going to a restaurant the next day. They wanted to give me time to calm down after all the stress the exams had caused me. I took a shower, took some warmer clothes, because I lived in a place where, even though it was almost summer, the temperatures were still pretty low, packed a ham sandwich, took my umbrella, because it was pretty cloudy, took my backpack and headed out the door. I didn't purposefully go to the forest to find bones, I just liked being surrounded by nature. I even brought a book. As I was walking on my usual path, I noticed something was out of place. I walked on that path for thousands of times and I pretty much memorized it. This time it was different. I looked from tree to tree to understand what was wrong. Then I saw it. A map, nailed to a tree. I approached it. It was very moldy and the ink was almost indistinguishable. The nail itself looked as if it has seen 200+ years of history. I thought that maybe somebody had put it there as a joke. Since I still had plenty of time and the sun was still high in the sky, I decided to follow the map. I ripped it from the nail and it came right up. I studied it for a bit. It had the exact path I would take every single time in red, and at the end there was an X. Above it was written, treasure. As I looked at it, I saw a house, drawn in blue ink not far from the X, and it was drawn over in red ink. I didn't know where that house was, but I guess it was further than where I usually ventured. Some exploring didn't sound all that bad to me, as I was actually looking for a new hangout spot. I was walking for about 2 hours, when I noticed something black in the distance. I started walking faster, as I was trying to visit the place and return home before the sun went down. The path looked like it was frequently walked on, as the ground was hard and there was no grass growing on it. When I finally reached the cabin, it was a classic horror movie cabin, boarded up windows. Some of the windows were smashed, and on the porch there was a rocking chair, with spider webs seemingly keeping it in place. I was too curious to leave it unchecked, so I peeked through one of the smashed windows. As I was getting closer to the hole, an awful stench started attacking my nostrils. I held my breath and got quickly close to the cracked glass. Inside, there was a dead deer without its head, in an advanced state of decomposition. Maggots were everywhere, and I quickly backed away. As I said, it didn't look fresh kill, so I figured that the deer had maybe entered the house when it wasn't boarded up and got stuck. That was the most rational explanation that I could come up with. Before I continued, I snapped a photo of the cabin, because it was actually a cool spot if you ignored the rotting animal. Then started walking at a fast rate, because I wanted to find that X. I walked for about 15 minutes before I assumed that was the place on the map, because a huge X made out of leaves and sticks covered the ground. In the middle of it there was a deer head. I assumed it was the deer's from earlier head. Still, I was pretty spooked, because I couldn't quite understand why an animal's head would be so far from its body. I ran all the way to my house, because it was almost 8 p.m. and I didn't want to be stuck in a dark forest with whatever the hell was in those woods. I swear I could hear somebody walking behind me all the way from that X to my house, but every time I turned around there was nothing there. Got home, took a shower, ate dinner, and fell asleep watching some TV. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of rustling outside my window. My bedroom was on the second floor. I pulled the curtains aside and looked down. A deer was seemingly searching something through the bushes. I was ready to go back to bed, when I took a second look at it and noticed that its face looked too flat for a deer. Just then it turned to look at me. A human face stared back at me. The deer had a human face. It let out this gut-wrenching scream and got on its 2 hind legs. It started banging its legs on the side of my house. I quickly closed the curtains and got back to bed. I was too terrified to do anything else. I tried falling asleep and couldn't. The banging continued for another 5 minutes, but felt like 5 hours. Somehow, I fell back asleep and woke up drenched in sweat. I hoped that it would prove to be just a nightmare, but it wasn't. The side of my house really had bloody hoof marks and even some dents. It was a weird pattern. It looked like something I had seen before. I ran inside and grabbed the map from the other day. I put it in front of the side of my house. It was the same, only this time the X was marked on my house. From that night on, I always closed the curtains and locked the doors. I could hear the leaves rustling every night, but they were coming from different corner of the house at same time. Each morning, I would find skulls and bones that were most probably human. At least the skulls. 7 skulls in total. One day I woke up and on my door was written in blood 7 names. I searched them online and it turned out every single one of them was once a resident of the property and that they all died. Even if the cause of death was something simple, like old age or disease, the hobby of all of them was hunting deer. From that day on, I started becoming increasingly interested in the idea of collecting deer antlers. But I know I mustn't buy any arms, as I believe they are trying to claim their next victim. I believe that this house was driving every single owner insane at the thought of killing the deer population. One day, I woke up and found a shotgun on my porch. I couldn't control myself anymore. I took it in my hands and the timing couldn't have been better. A deer was skipping across the field in front of the forest. I shot it. Ran over there and ripped its antlers of its head, but I felt like I didn't do everything I needed to. I started ripping chunks of meat and started eating it raw. Thinking about it now makes me sick. But I couldn't control myself. It wasn't even tasty for my sick self. I only killed one deer, but I know they are coming for me. I will become the 8th owner of the house and I will, together with the other 7 deers, drive the 9th one insane. I can hear a knock on my door. I think they already arrived. Pale faces with antlers stare at me through the windows. 7. And brought the dead deer I killed with them. It looks just like me. 7th story. This story was shared by you/stalked_by_you. Central Michigan Horror. Obviously, I am from a town in central Michigan. Proud of it and even love our harsh cold winters. We go weeks sometimes here in Michigan without any actual sunshine and it can really get to you. I like to do what most people consider stupid. I camp in the coldest of months alone in the woods. It really strengthens your stamina to the cold, and until recently I found it very peaceful. I honestly don't think I will ever go camping again because it will always be in the back of my mind. About a week ago it was fairly warm for late January in Michigan. So I decided it was perfect to go out and camp since I wouldn't be nearly as cold as I usually am and could actually sleep somewhat comfortably. Well, I was wrong, it was anything but peaceful or comfortable. I packed up my normal supplies and planned where to camp. This time, by luck or the grace of God, I decided to bring my 20-gauge shotgun with me. I figured since it was warm enough a bear might wake up and be hungry. Now I know how rare it is to encounter a bear in Michigan, especially in winter, but I had a feeling this time and thank God I listened to it. Around 2:30 p.m. I headed out to state land, right around a 25-minute drive from my house to my camping spot I chose. It was literally in the middle of the woods, with pine trees surrounding me all around to help block the wind. I made my own makeshift shelter and it was a lot warmer than I expected. Started a fire and started cooking some good old hot dogs. I was enjoying myself drinking some beer and got a bit tipsy before it got dark. I walked to a tree to take a piss and heard a twig snap. Now in the middle of the woods there are animals and such, so I didn't think much of it, but when you're alone I don't care who you are, it makes you a tad bit nervous. I finished my business and went into my little home to get some sleep. Thanks to the beer I had to pee again probably around 12:30 a.m. I crawled out and went to the same tree. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement about 25 yards away. Naturally my heart began to race and I immediately woke up. I stared and waited and nothing else moved, so I went back in to lay down. As soon as I got comfortable I heard it again. Only this time it didn't stop. It kept coming closer and closer and I couldn't help but notice it was definitely walking on 2 feet. "Hello?" I said aloud nervously. The footsteps stopped about 5 feet from where I was laying and didn't move. I sat there quietly, my heart pounding through my chest. I slowly got up and tried to poke my head out and see what was near my shelter. "Hello?" A voice gurgled from behind me. My head snapped around and looked in all directions. I was in pure panic and couldn't find where the fuck this person was. "Who is it, god damn it?" I shouted, my voice thundering through the night. Then I heard crunching as whoever it was took off running away. I jumped out and searched frantically and didn't see a thing, so I ran to where I heard it walking around. "What the fuck?" I stammered as my blood turned ice cold. The footprints weren't even human. It looked like a cross between man and deer hoofs. I grabbed my shit as fast as I could and began to jog back to my truck. Fuck that, whatever was out there I didn't want to find out what it was, and if it were a prank it was a damn good one. After a few minutes of walking I seen my truck ahead and broke into a full sprint. Then I heard the crunching behind me and noticed I was being followed. I looked behind and I swear to God I nearly shit my pants. There was this huge guy, probably 6 feet 7 inches, running after me, only his knees were bent the wrong way. He was fast too, gaining on me rapidly. Holy fuck! I shouted and picked up my pace as fast as I could. He started to laugh and it sounded so wrong. Like he was completely evil, and it had a cackling and gurgling sound. Whatever it was enjoying my fear and had horrible plans for me if it caught me. I finally reached my truck and yanked open the door, slamming it shut and locking it behind me. Just as I hit the lock button he ran full blast into my truck, actually denting the door. Then he put his face against my window and smiled this disgusting grin. His eyes were huge and he looked completely and utterly insane. I started my truck and he ran in front of it as if he was going to be able to stop it. I threw it into drive and floored it. I didn't budge an inch and noticed something else. He was actually lifting my front end off the ground slightly, attempting to tip the truck on its side. "Get the fuck out of here!" I shouted. I then remembered I had my shotgun with me and grabbed it, loading a slug as quick as I could. I rolled down my window and as soon as I did he came charging, laughing and drooling. I aimed right at his chest, fired. He howled so loudly I had to cover my ears and he landed right on his back. I didn't waste any time as I floored it and raced down the road as fast as I could without going in the ditch. I have never been more relieved in my life to see the exit sign and very briefly felt a sense of relief. I looked in the mirror and there he was, chasing me again, only this time he didn't have a smile on his face. It was pure rage and I knew if he caught up to me I wasn't going to live through this. I passed the exit sign spinning out on the road and went right into the ditch. Fuck. No fuck. I shouted, pounding my steering wheel. I looked over and expected the worst. For some reason though, he stopped right before the paved road and stared angrily at me. I put the truck in 4-wheel drive and barely made it out. As I started driving down the road I heard it howl one more time and then he disappeared. I never told anyone about this because I knew that no one would believe me and they would all just laugh at me. It has definitely made me change about going even this summer, and I don't think I'll ever go into the woods alone again. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.